Coming up, what is the state of tribal colleges and universities? Cheryl Crazy Bull explains. Plus, South Dakota State Senator Shawn Bordeaux weighs in on his state's failure to pass its own Indian Child Welfare Act. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start today in Las Vegas, Nevada, with news of a res attendee who was killed after being struck by a car. 45-year-old Guiadine Elliott was attending the multi-day Reservation Economic Summit. ICT has confirmed with the Clark County Coroner's Office that Elliott was crossing the Las Vegas Strip at around 2:17 a.m. on March 28th. Video surveillance and evidence at the scene indicate Elliott was struck while attempting to cross the street during a do not walk signal. He died on the scene. The uninjured driver has been identified as Brandon Calicolio. According to police, Calicolio failed a sobriety test at the scene and was taken into custody on DUI-related charges. Social media condolences poured in for Elliott, who is a 15-year veteran of the Ontario Provincial Police Department. Officials from the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development expressed their sympathies, adding they have been in contact with Elliott's family for additional support. Las Vegas police say the incident remains under investigation. Last week, the Biden administration's Investing in America tour made a pit stop in Oklahoma. Dakota McDowell-Wapakichi was there and has this report.
This was the scene last week at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff and Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm invited tribal leaders here to a conversation on geothermal energy. But only 3 of the 39 tribes in Oklahoma were present with their elected governors or chairmen. That included Cheyenne Arapaho Governor Reggie Wasserny, Chickasaw Nation Governor Bill Anatubby, and Citizen Potawatomi Nation Chairman Rocky Barrett. Secretary Granholm said some of the messaging from this event and the White House Tribal Nations Summit is very alike.
The tribal nations we've been in close contact with and are very eager to develop plans to become powerhouses for clean energy.
Emhoff weighed in saying he will take this discussion back to D.C.
And we both took copious notes, and we're going to take that back and figure out how to move forward.
Governor Wasserny says his tribe dabbled into geothermal years ago.
She wanted to try to find out what the tribes were doing with geothermal, such as our tribe. We looked at the geothermal. The cost was a barrier.
The department gave the tribal representatives a booklet detailing grants and other key points that could help tribes dabble into geothermal energy. Governor Wasserny told ICT that the invitation to tribal leaders came just days before the event.
It was a great event. I think the timing was just off because it being Easter weekend. So I believe they want to probably schedule another one at another point in time so that they could hear more of the tribes.
Before the meeting in Norman, the day started in Stillwater on the main campus of Oklahoma State University. Secretary Granholm announced that 5 universities will be awarded nearly $19 million. That will impact OSU students like Tion Foltz, who is of Muskogee descent.
We visit all of these small and medium-sized manufacturers. They'll walk us through their process. It's a great way to network with different people in different industries, and I'm personally very passionate about the environment, so I love the aspect of saving energy in the long term.
Emhoff also made a stop at the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City, where Chickasaw Governor Bill Anatubby plus Oklahoma City Mayor and Osage citizen David Holt guided the second gentleman through the museum. In Oklahoma, Dakota McDowell-Wapakichi, ICT News.
The 2023 National Women's Hall of Fame inductees were announced, and this year's list includes a Native woman who championed the financial well-being of tribes. Eloise Cobell, also known as Yellow Bird Woman, founded Blackfeet National Bank in Montana in 1987. It was the first bank established by a tribe. That effort took years. She outlined the early difficulties she faced at a keynote address at Dartmouth College.
The bankers that I would talk to would say, well, Indians don't pay their bills. There's no way we can collect money on, if I wanted to start a bank, I would start it in a prosperous community. Why would I start a bank in an Indian community? And so it got you to the point where your blood was boiling, and it's like you had to do something. So I went back to the tribe and reported, there's no way we can get another financial institution to start a bank here.
In 1997, she won a MacArthur Genius Award for her work with the bank and Native financial literacy. She donated part of the proceeds to support the groundbreaking class action lawsuit Cobell versus Salazar, where she was the lead plaintiff. The case challenged the mismanagement of trust funds from the United States belonging to more than 500,000 individual Native Americans. In 2010, the government approved a $3.4 billion settlement for the case. It is one of the largest ever awarded in a class action suit against the federal government. Cobell, who died in 2011, will be honored at this year's National Women's Hall of Fame induction ceremony in New York on September 30th. A popular show highlighting the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives has wrapped its first season. ABC's Alaska Daily centers on Eileen Fitzgerald, a disgraced reporter who leaves her high-profile job in New York to join a local newspaper in Anchorage. Fitzgerald joins an Alaska Native reporter to investigate cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women in the state. It stars Hilary Swank alongside Indigenous actors Grace Dove and Irene Bedard. Before wrapping its 11-episode season last week, Alaska Daily aired on Thursday evenings in a primetime spot across the country. While the show was not created by a Native person, the production team did include Alaska Natives, including Vera Starbard, who wrote the season finale. A second season has not yet been announced. You can find the series on Hulu as well as abc.com. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Cheryl Crazy Bull has been the president and CEO of the American Indian College Fund since 2012. The organization is one of the largest financial scholarship providers for Native students. ICT's Mark Trahant has this interview with its leader from the Indian Gaming Association's annual trade show and convention.
I'm visiting with Cheryl Crazy Bull, president of the American Indian College Fund, and recently she gave a report on the state of Indian tribal nation universities and colleges. Thought we'd start there and ask you about that, and welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for having me. I'm really glad to report that the state of tribal colleges and universities is good. We are seeing increased enrollment, which in many institutions had decreased during COVID. The creative opportunities that the pandemic provided to the TCUs continues to give us a really positive path forward. We expanded our virtual offerings. We expanded the ways that we provide students with support, recommitted to the language and cultural aspects of our work, reestablished strong relationships with our tribes, continue to provide education services all the way from early childhood. Now recently, Navajo Technical University announced the very first PhD program at a tribal college, so I think we're doing pretty well.
How has the pandemic changed how we learn?
I think what the pandemic did was created an environment where tribal colleges and universities saw that they could give access to more tribal citizens located in other places. And so what I've seen happen is the tribal colleges have created a better pathway support system so that students can identify a good fit at a tribal university or college, and then help them matriculate into those institutions and then give them support throughout their education. Using both what we're seeing virtual, but we're also seeing hybrid So there's some in-class activities, and then we are also continuing to provide face-to-face. So I think we're capitalizing on kind of the modern world of education.
One of the things that intrigues me about tribal institutions is how significant they are as economic engines and creating all kinds of jobs and really opportunity within a community.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I have worked in the tribal college movement since the early 80s. And what I've seen is the growth of the tribal college's ability to offer programs that support tribal priorities. Also, the growth of the ability of tribal colleges to train people for existing jobs. So we're seeing where it used to be that a lot of people were employed by our tribes and by education institutions like schools that were not necessarily tribal members. Now we're seeing more tribal people getting those positions. I think the other thing that we're seeing from an economic growth standpoint is the tribal colleges themselves growing as institutions, offering more programs, expanding into food sovereignty, fulfilling a lot of their land grant missions, growing a lot of programs that reach out into their communities beyond the academic and vocational programs.
You mentioned the word innovation. I'm just curious what some of the areas where you see that happening.
Yeah, so food sovereignty, definitely. There's a lot of work going on in tribal colleges around restoration of indigenous food practices. There's a lot of innovative research going on. It depending on place, might be looking at what's happening with fishing, what's happening with bison, what's happening with sheep. So you kind of see that at the different tribal colleges. So I think there's a lot of really innovative research going on. I think there's innovative grow your own opportunities where tribal colleges are looking at how can they find people and train them for faculty positions, for example, at tribal colleges. And I just heard this morning here at the gaming convention about a partnership between the Red Lake Nation and the Sequan people of the Sequan Nation to offer gaming education. And so you're seeing those kinds of innovative activities as well. Something people don't realize is some of the tribal colleges are involved with advanced manufacturing. So they're supporting some of the national labs and the different federal departments with the growth of that aspect of our communities and building manufacturing. We see interest in things like cybersecurity. The College Fund is involved with computer science education with some of our partners, where we're really looking at how can we develop and own our own place-based data.
Has the coming out of the pandemic, has it made it more affordable or less affordable?
It's about the same. I think what we see at the College Fund, one of our big focus areas is removing barriers to access that are associated with financial issues that students face. And I think, there's always been a gap between what students can access, both in terms of federal and tribal aid, and then what we can give in terms of scholarship support. So that continues to be a big focus of tribal educators to increase funding so that we can remove all barriers. And recently, the College Fund, along with other scholarship providers, issued a study on college affordability among Native students. And again, they identified that it's the affordability of college and the issues around student loans that are challenges for them as well.
I wonder, is there any early indication that the changes the federal government's thinking about making will help on the debt issue?
I think absolutely. I think that so most tribal colleges don't themselves offer student loans, so this really impacts students who attend predominantly white or mainstream institutions, and sometimes it's a drain on the brain power in our community because students have to go work somewhere else in order to pay back their student loans. So I know personal stories of people who are significantly affected by it, improve their financial situation a lot. We're also really supportive, though, of federal financial aid like the Pell Grant and increasing the Pell Grant so that it really helps create that equity that we need to access education.
I'm going to turn this discussion. We talked about how we make sure that there's a radical feed coming out of institutions. How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, we were talking about the fact that in the early years of the tribal college movement, we recognized that the very existence of our institutions is revolutionary in higher education. Who would have thought that tribes could create their own place-based higher education institutions? And our intention had been that we would educate a population that would transform the systems that we were working within. The way the federal government interacts with us, the way schools deliver education, healthcare, the way the economy is created, all of those kinds of things were supposed to be things that we transformed into being more culturally rooted, into being very community and family oriented, into being less of a bureaucracy, creating that kind of distribution of resources that's more traditional to our values. So what I've seen is that systems are powerful. And when you graduate with a teaching degree, for example, and you go work in a school, there's a lot of power in that school for you to conform. So I've been thinking about what does it look like to revisit and revitalize that revolutionary intention, including looking at things like actually having our own tribal accrediting agency, maybe teaching movement building skills, teaching people what reform actually is, giving people exposure. I think about the number of times that I and others recreate what we know, and is there a way for us to look elsewhere and create something that is more traditional to our people's understanding of how to provide services and live together.
Where do we start?
What are some of the ways that we could do things differently? I think about education, like what's the thing that we need to fill in order to get education to be more revolutionary? Do we need to teach a class in, activism? Or the early days of the tribal college movement, Paulo Freire's work was very influential, as was Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. So there was this intention that we were going to educate our people to, make that kind of change. And I'd like to have that conversation.
You also had the 1970s where just so much was going on, and that whole era fed into each other.
Yeah, we need that back.
That's a good place to end it. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Shawn Bordeaux was first elected to the South Dakota House of Representatives in 2014. Then last year, he won a seat in the state Senate. Our Shirley Sneve caught up with him last week at the Reservation Economic Summit in Las Vegas and asked him about tribal tourism and about his state's failure to install its own Indian Child Welfare Act.
Shawn Bordeaux, I'm glad you could join us this morning here at the Res Conference. You are a state senator from District 26 in South Dakota, so welcome to the ICT Newscast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time to spend and share a little bit about what's going on in my district.
What's going on in your district?
Well, a lot right now. We're kind of transitioning between the state legislature just got done, so we pay a little bit of time and a little bit of lobbying effort to try to figure out what the state can do to help better the citizens of District 26A, the Native Americans and the non-Native Americans. And so I have 8 counties, 3 tribes.
Well, I'm from South Dakota, and so I follow South Dakota politics. I get a little upset sometimes, but then, as a tribal person living across the border in Nebraska, I think it's my job to help support you guys over there. It hasn't always been easy with the Republican governor of South Dakota, has it?
No, it hasn't. She was invited to our committee when I was chairman of the State Tribal Relations Committee. She sent her Secretary of Tribal Relations, and he came and got a pretty good chewing out by some of the Republican senators. And they invited her to come, and she never would attend. She basically just snubbed her nose at the committee and said that's a mean committee. So, it's been tough to work with her, trying to get, her to pay attention to Indian country and unique needs that we have in South Dakota.
Tourism has been a big industry for the tribes. How's that been going as we come out of the pandemic?
Well, we're in a unique situation right now because we spent a lot of time developing what's become the South Dakota Native Tourism Alliance, and we followed the North Dakota folks' cue, and they put together a pretty good team that has tackled tourism in North Dakota. Of course, you got the Bakken area with lots of money up in the 3 affiliated tribes. South Dakota, on the other hand, we have a lot of poverty and we don't have the resources to do the same. But this year we teamed up with South Dakota Tourism, and they're doing a lot to help us, to give us some of their folks that work for South Dakota Tourism team, to give us some money from marketing, to help us get a couple of buses. We're going to bring a bus tour. It's going to start in the Black Hills and Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse, then come down to Pine Ridge and spend a five-day tour visiting Rosebud, Lower Brule, Cheyenne River, and finishing in Standing Rock. So we really need a good team to move us past being the poorest county in the United States. It's really sad that in my district I have probably 2 or 3 of the poorest counties that the United States has.
You've also got a couple of very important tribal colleges over there, Oglala Lakota College and then Sinte Gleshka College, which, by the way, your father ran for many years, and I'm so sorry for your loss. But he really was a groundbreaker for the tribal college movement. And looking back now over his life and his influence, how does that look today?
Well, he put almost 51 years into being president of Sinte Gleshka University, and I was a 4-year-old, moved from Minneapolis, and he was working on his doctorate program at University of Minnesota when we were brought back through ceremonies that some of our Native American community had in the spirit world, was told to go seek my father and bring him back. So my mother was game, and as kids, as 4 of us came along, and I'm the youngest, but we were happy to be part of the Rosebud community, and Sinte Gleshka University has done so much for the Rosebud Sioux tribe.
So tell us what happened to the Indian Child Welfare Act bill that was up before the legislature.
Red Dawn Foster did a good job of getting that bill through the Senate. She got it through a committee in the House, and when it got on the House floor, I think it kind of scared some people who thought all of a sudden they're going to have to be accountable to some of the activities that have been going on a long time, which is that South Dakota has kind of been the place where people take advantage. And, we were talking about poverty before, and you hear the term poverty porn, and people who are into trying to figure out, is it exciting to look at all this poverty? And one of the things that comes out of that is foster kids. And so we got a lot of activity going in with the courts, South Dakota judges refusing to work with the federal courts. One judge was even fined $50,000 for not turning over information. So South Dakota looks really bad in this effort, and they're needing to do better. And this committee that was proposed was a task force that would have met 8 times and tried to figure out what's the best way of tackling the situation of, kids leaving the reservation and not knowing who they are. Maybe their family or someone in their family had a drug or alcohol problem, but that's no reason to move the kids away from the reservation, away from the communities where they need to be there in order to be whole and understand who they are and what this culture means to them and what it means to us collectively. So it's sad that, after the thing started building up traction, they had to kill it in the end because I don't think they were ready to answer those questions.
You know, it's always been a hard thing to watch, when what is the definition of a family and what's the definition of a healthy family. And I think that when we're talking about, within tribal communities, success looks different than in the mainstream society. And I don't think success can be measured by dollars, because a lot of us are really, truly treat each other as family. And that's a different economy. So when you're using white man standards to take this is a healthy family, I think they need to wake up a little bit.
I think they don't understand that most of us live in dilapidated housing, and our homes may not look good from the outside, but they're beautiful on the inside with a lot of artwork and things that are appropriate to our culture and unique to who we are and very special to us. So we're very proud of our place, and we're very proud of our communities, even though they're often impoverished places. We think that when people would come there and spend a little time with us, they won't want to leave.
Joining me is Shawn Bordeaux from the Rosebud Sioux Tribe in District 26 in the South Dakota Senate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.